The radiation alarm screamed 3 seconds before the drill was supposed to end, and Marin Salk was already chest-deep in the flood channel when every light on the training deck went from amber to crimson. She stopped swimming, treaded water, listened. Training alarms had a specific cadence: 3 short pulses, pause, 3 short pulses. Every rescue swimmer in Earth's interstellar extraction corps learned to distinguish the drill tone from the real one before they ever touched open water. The drill tone was a bark. The real one was a wail. This was a wail. All hands, this is not a drill. Structural compromise on Dreshani Orbital Ring 7. Multiple hull breaches, flooding in progress. All extraction qualified personnel report to Bay 4. Marin was already climbing out of the flood channel, water streaming from the seals of her exposure suit, before the announcement finished. Around her the other trainees, 6 of them, all junior swimmers completing their zero-gravity water entry certification, stood frozen in the shallow end, with their practice dummies still clutched under their arms. "Drop the dummies," Marin said. "Kit up, Bay 4, move." She did not wait to see if they followed. They would or they wouldn't, and either way she was going. Bay 4 was 90 meters forward on the UESS Harrogate, a dedicated extraction frigate that had been running training cycles in the Dreshani corridor for the past 11 days. The Harrogate was not a warship. It carried no offensive armament heavier than a point defense array designed to swat debris. What it carried was 24 extraction pods, a hyperbaric treatment suite, a surgical bay rated for 11 species atmospheric requirements, and the single largest complement of rescue swimmers in Earth's interstellar fleet. Marin had served aboard for 9 years. She was the senior rescue swimmer chief petty officer, with more extractions logged than anyone currently serving in the Corps. 43 career pulls from hard vacuum, 29 from irradiated environments, 16 from active combat zones where the shooting hadn't stopped yet. She had a metal pin in her left shoulder from a decompression event on a Cathara mining platform 2 years ago, and a radiation badge that had been replaced 4 times because she kept exceeding the quarterly dosimetry limit. She was 36 years old, and she had never lost a subject in the water. Not once. Bay 4 was chaos when she arrived. The Harrogate's executive officer, Commander Diallo, was standing at the tactical display with his jaw set and his hands flat on the console. The display showed the Dreshani Orbital Ring, a massive toroidal habitat that circled the planet Dreshval like a silver crown, home to roughly 12,000 Dreshani civilians. The ring was divided into 7 sections, each independently pressurized and gravity-plated. Sections 1 through 6 showed green on the display. Section 7 was red, deep, ugly red, with subsystem indicators cascading to failure across the board. "What happened?" Marin asked, pulling her extraction harness from the ready rack. "Coolant feed ruptured in the ring's primary heat exchange stack," Diallo said without looking up. "The Dreshani use a liquid metal coolant for their thermal regulation. Their species requires water temperature maintained within a 2-degree band, or their gill tissue begins to necrotize. The rupture contaminated the habitat water in Section 7 with irradiated bismuth particulate. Their filtration system couldn't handle the load, and the back pressure blew 3 hull panels." "How many in Section 7? 49 residents. The Dreshani evacuated 2 to Section 6 before the emergency bulkhead sealed. 47 remain." Marin's hands did not pause on the harness straps. 47, in irradiated water, behind sealed bulkheads. She had trained for this exact scenario, or something close enough that the differences were academic. "Water depth. Variable. The gravity plating in Section 7 is failing in sequence. Some compartments are at standard gravity, some are at 0.3, and at least 2 have gone to microgravity entirely. The water is redistributing according to whatever gravity gradient exists moment to moment. So it's sloshing. That's one way to describe it." Radiation level in the water. Diallo finally looked at her. His expression was the one she had seen on commanding officers exactly twice before in her career. The expression that said he was about to tell her something she already knew, but didn't want confirmed. 300 millisieverts per hour at the source, dropping to 150 at the far compartments. Your exposure suit is rated for 200 over a 4-hour window. So I stay out of the hot zone. The hot zone is where 23 of the 47 are located, Chief. The Dreshani don't have legs. They can't walk to the cold compartments. They're aquatic obligates. They move by swimming through the habitat channels, and the habitat channels in the hot zone are the ones that ruptured. They're trapped in rising water that's slowly poisoning their gill tissue. Marin finished fastening the harness. She reached for her helmet. The helmet had a dosimeter readout on the interior visor, a small amber number that would track her cumulative exposure in real time and turn red at 80% of her maximum. What about the Dreshani's own rescue capability? They don't have one. Diallo's voice was flat. The Dreshani are a deep-water species. Their entire evolutionary history is aquatic. They build their habitats around water. They live in it, work in it, raise their young in it. The concept of rescue from water doesn't translate. It's like asking a human to develop a rescue protocol for breathing air. They have emergency procedures for decompression, for thermal failure, for atmospheric breaches that drain their water. But a scenario where the water itself becomes the threat, they have no framework for it, no equipment, no training. They will after today, Marin said, and put on her helmet. She briefed the team in Bay 4 while the Harrogate closed to docking distance with the ring. 6 junior swimmers, all of whom had been doing water entry drills 30 minutes ago and were now pulling on exposure suits with hands that shook. Marin did not comment on the shaking. She had shaken on her first real call too. Everyone did. The shaking stopped when the water hit. We're going in through the emergency docking collar on Section 7's upper spoke, she said, pointing at the tactical display. The upper spoke is above the current waterline in most compartments, which means we enter dry and descend. The Dreshani are distributed across 6 compartments. She tapped each one. Compartments A and B are cold, low radiation, stable gravity, 8 residents total. We extract those first because they're easiest and because every subject we get out early is one fewer we have to track. Compartments C and D are warm, elevated radiation, fluctuating gravity, 12 residents. Compartments E and F are hot, 23 residents, failing gravity. Irradiated water above the suit rating. How do we work the hot compartments? Asked Wen, the most senior of the juniors. She was 22 and she had logged exactly 0 real-world extractions before today. In pairs, short entries. One swimmer goes in, locates the subject, secures them in a rescue harness and begins the pull. The second swimmer stays at the compartment threshold as the anchor. You maintain the guideline and you time the entry. 4 minutes maximum per entry in compartments E and F. After 4 minutes, the anchor pulls the line whether the swimmer is ready or not. No arguments, no heroics, no, just 1 more second. 4 minutes. Am I clear? 6 nods. One of them Vasquez, the youngest, 19 years old, a natural swimmer who had scored top marks in every pool drill and had never seen contaminated water outside a textbook, raised his hand. Chief, what if 4 minutes isn't enough to reach a subject? Then you come back and you go in again, and again, and again, until every subject is out or your dosimeter turns red. When it turns red, you're done. You come out and you stay out. That's the rule. That is the only rule that matters more than getting the subject. The Harrogate docked with the ring 6 minutes later. The docking collar sealed with a hiss that Marin felt through her boots, and the hatch opened onto a Dreshani corridor that smelled like ozone and salt, and something metallic that burned the back of her throat even through the helmet's filtration. The Dreshani built their habitats like coral organic curves, iridescent surfaces, walls that shifted color in response to water temperature and current flow. Even in the emergency lighting, the corridor was beautiful. It was also tilted. The gravity plating beneath Marin's feet was pulling at roughly 70% of standard, and the pull was not quite vertical. She walked with a lean, like a sailor on a listing ship. "Compartment A is 200 meters ahead and down one level," she said. "When you're with me." Vasquez, take Okafor, follow at 50 meters. Reese, Tanaka, hold the docking collar. Nobody gets past you without a headcount check. Priya, Dos Santos, start setting up the decontamination line inside the Harrogate. Every subject coming out of this water gets full decon before they touch the ship's interior. They moved. The water in compartment A reached Marin's waist when she descended the ramp. It was warm, not unpleasantly so, but warm in the way that the ocean is warm near a thermal vent, with a slight mineral tang that the suit's sensors flagged as elevated bismuth, but below hazardous threshold. The emergency lighting turned the water a deep amber, and the Dreshani architecture beneath the surface, submerged benches, channel markers, what appeared to be a communal gathering pool, was visible in rippling silhouette. The first Dreshani she found was pressed against the far wall of the compartment, half submerged, her body undulating in the slow rhythmic pattern that Marin recognized from the species briefing as distress respiration. The Dreshani were cetacean-adjacent, smooth-skinned, sleek-bodied, ranging from 2 to 3 meters in length, with broad fluke tails and gill crests that fanned along their necks like living coral. Their skin was semi-translucent in places, and in the amber light Marin could see the dark tracery of blood vessels beneath the surface, pulsing with a heartbeat that was too fast. "It's all right," Marin said, though she knew the Dreshani's translator might or might not be functioning. The station's translation grid was on emergency power and dropping syllables. "I'm from the Harrogate, Earth vessel. I'm a rescue swimmer. I'm here to get you out." The Dreshani's eyes were enormous, dark and liquid, set wide on a smooth, tapered head that ended in a delicate jaw lined with baleen-like filter plates. Those eyes fixed on Marin with an expression she had learned to read across 11 species, the look that said, "I did not think anyone was coming." "Can you swim?" Marin asked. A sound from the Dreshani, a low, resonant pulse that the partial translator rendered as able slow. "That's fine. Slow is fine." Marin moved to the Dreshani's side, unclipped the rescue harness from her belt, and began fitting it around the Dreshani's midsection, forward of the fluke tail. The harness was designed for bipedal subjects and didn't fit well, but Marin had modified 3 of them during the transit, widening the straps with cargo webbing and adding a secondary loop that could cradle a tail or a thorax or anything else that standard equipment hadn't anticipated. She'd done this modification in her bunk at 300 on the second night aboard, because 9 years of extraction work had taught her that standard equipment was designed for the species you'd already rescued, never for the one you were about to. "This is a harness," she explained as she worked. "It's going to feel tight around your middle. That's intentional. I'm going to tow you through the corridor and up the ramp to the dry section. You don't have to do anything except breathe. Your gills will stay submerged until we reach the transition zone, and then I'm going to lift you into a transfer cradle with oxygenated water. You'll be breathing the whole time. Understand?" The Dreshani made a sound that wasn't words. It was a vibration, low, harmonic, felt more than heard. The partial translator didn't even attempt it. Marin had heard sounds like it before. Gratitude didn't always need language. "When I've got the first subject secured, beginning pull." The extraction took 4 minutes. The corridor was narrow enough that Marin had to swim sideways, towing the Dreshani behind her, the guideline trailing from her waist back to Wen's anchor position at the compartment entrance. The Dreshani weighed significantly less than a human in the reduced gravity, but her body was long and hydrodynamic, and the shifting current from the fluctuating gravity plating kept pushing them both sideways. Twice Marin braced her feet against the corridor wall and pulled hand over hand along the guideline. By the time she reached the ramp and hauled the Dreshani into the transfer cradle, a stretcher-sized basin filled with clean, oxygenated water from the Harrogate's reserves. Her arms were burning, and her dosimeter read 12%. One down, 46 to go. They cleared compartment A in 19 minutes. 7 subjects, all ambulatory enough to swim with assistance. The Dreshani were quiet, not silent, but quiet in the way of people who were watching something they didn't have a category for. Every one of them looked at Maren the same way the first one had. The dark liquid eyes tracking her movements with that particular blend of disbelief and dawning recognition. Maren had seen it before. She knew what it meant. It meant, you came into our water. Compartment B was faster. Only one resident, an elderly Dreshani male whose gill crests had gone pale, a sign of thermal shock. The species briefing had warned. His body temperature had dropped below the safe band, and his muscles were sluggish. Maren swam him out cradled against her chest, his fluked tail dragging behind them, his eyes closed. At the transfer cradle she checked his gill perfusion and flagged him for the Harrogate's medical team as priority thermal. 8 down, 39 remaining, dosimeter at 18%. Compartment C was where the mission changed. The gravity failed completely as Maren descended the ramp, and the water, which had been chest-deep and behaving like water, became a suspended mass that filled the compartment wall to wall. No surface, no bottom. Just water in every direction, held in place by nothing, slowly drifting in a sphere that filled the compartment's volume and left pockets of trapped atmosphere in the corners where the curve of the architecture created air gaps. Maren had trained for microgravity water operations. The theory was straightforward. Without gravity to orient the water, you navigated in 3 dimensions, and your only reference was the guideline and your own proprioception. The practice was that every instinct a swimmer had surface up, bottom down, kicked toward the light became meaningless. She switched her helmet lamp to maximum and pushed into the suspended water mass. The Dreshani in compartment C were clustered. 6 of them, gathered in a tight formation near what had been the compartment's central channel, a broad tube of water that, in normal gravity, would have been a swimming thoroughfare. Without gravity, it was just a denser region of the same omnidirectional water mass. The 6 Dreshani were holding each other, their fluked tails intertwined, their gill crests pressed together in a pattern that the species briefing identified as a communal stress response. I need to separate them to harness them individually, Maren told Wen over the comm. They're cluster bonded. If I pull one loose without calming the group first, the rest may panic and scatter into the compartment. In microgravity, that means they could end up in the trapped air pockets, where their gills can't function. What do you need? Time, stay on the anchor. I'm going to approach the cluster and see if I can communicate. Maren swam to the cluster. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her lamp aimed away from their eyes. The Dreshani watched her with 12 enormous dark eyes, and the harmonic vibration they were producing was strong enough that Maren could feel it through her exposure suit, a deep thrumming that resonated in her sternum. She reached the cluster and stopped, hung in the water a meter away, extended her hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. The largest Dreshani in the cluster, a female with silver-blue skin and gill crests that extended from her jawline to the base of her skull in elaborate branching patterns, studied Maren's hand for a long moment. Then she uncurled one of her pectoral fins and touched the tips of Maren's fingers. The contact lasted less than a second, but the harmonic vibration shifted, dropped in frequency, smoothed in cadence. The cluster loosened, not much but enough. Maren harnessed them one at a time. She took the smallest first, a juvenile, barely a meter long, whose skin was so translucent that Maren could see the rapid flutter of the heart through the chest wall. The juvenile made a high-pitched clicking sound when Maren lifted it free of the cluster, and the silver-blue female responded with a low pulse that the partial translator rendered as safe returning. The silver-blue female was last. She was the largest, the most difficult to harness, and by the time Marin secured the final strap, her dosimeter read 31% and her arms were shaking with a fatigue that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the physics of swimming in 3 dimensions, while towing a 70-kilogram aquatic being through a guideline-width corridor with no gravitational reference. 14 down, 33 remaining, compartment D next, then the hot zone. Compartment D cost them 40 minutes and introduced the first real problem. The gravity plating was not failed, but failing it cycled between standard gravity and microgravity in irregular intervals of between 10 and 90 seconds. The water surged and collapsed, surged and collapsed. Swimming in it was like swimming in a washing machine. Marin sent the juniors in pairs. Vasquez and Akafor took the first 3 subjects. Wen and Reese took the next 4, and Marin took the remaining 5 herself, because the dosimeter readings for the juniors were climbing faster than hers. The 5th subject in compartment D was a Dreshani who had been injured in the initial rupture. A chunk of hull plating had struck her across the tail, shattering the fluked structure and leaving the lower third of her body immobile. She could not swim. She could not even orient herself when the gravity cycled to micro. Marin found her pinned against a wall intake grate by the current, her gill crests flaring in rapid distress respiration, her skin mottled with dark patches that the species briefing identified as bruising from internal hemorrhage. Marin braced herself against the grate, wrapped both arms around the Dreshani, and held on through 3 gravity cycles. When the plating stabilized at roughly half standard for a window of about 20 seconds, she kicked hard for the corridor entrance, towing the injured Dreshani in a cradle hold that her shoulders screamed against. The Dreshani made a sound during the tow, not the harmonic vibration of gratitude, not the clicking of distress. A single long note, sustained and falling, that the translator did not touch. It sounded like a name. 26 down, 21 remaining, all of them in the hot zone, dosimeter at 44%. Marin called a brief at the threshold of compartment E. The water beyond the bulkhead was visibly different, darker, with a faint metallic shimmer that came from the suspended bismuth particulate. The radiation sensors on the bulkhead frame read 210 millisieverts per hour. Her suit was rated for 200. Chief, Wen's voice on the comm, steady, professional, but with the particular flatness that meant she was about to say something she didn't want to say. My dosimeter is at 58%. Vasquez is at 52. Akafor is at 61. Pull Akafor off the line. Send her back to decon. Vasquez and Reese, you take compartment E left side. There should be 9 subjects in the left channel network. 4-minute entries, hard clock. Wen, you're my anchor for the right side. 12 subjects in the right channel network and the main atrium. What about your dosimeter? 44. In 4-minute entries at 210 per hour, you'll hit your limit in roughly 6 entries. Then I'd better be fast. She went in. The hot zone was a different world. The bismuth contamination turned the water opaque in places, and Marin's helmet lamp cut through it in a cone of amber light that barely reached 3 meters. The Dreshani architecture was harder to navigate. The channels were narrower, designed for the fluid movement of aquatic bodies, not for a human swimmer in an exposure suit towing a guideline. Marin scraped her shoulder against a channel wall on the first turn and heard the suit's outer layer tear with a sound that made her stomach drop before the inner seal held. The first Dreshani in compartment E was a male, large, his skin gone dark with stress coloration. He was floating in a pocket of trapped atmosphere, his gill crests limp and gray, his body listing to one side. For a terrible second, Marin thought she was looking at a body. Then the gills flexed, weakly, but they flexed. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you. Stay still." She pulled him into the water, submerging his gills, and watched the color begin to return to the crests as oxygenated water flowed through the tissue. The gray faded to pale blue, then to the deeper teal of normal perfusion. His eyes opened. He looked at her. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Harness going on now." She extracted him in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Went back in. Found 2 more in the next channel, huddled together, their skin mottled with the dark radiation burns that the species briefing had warned about: bismuth particulate lodging in the semi-translucent dermis and delivering localized dose. Their gill crests were still functioning, but the tissue around the gills was swollen and inflamed. Marin harnessed them both, towing them in tandem, the guideline singing with tension as Wen held the anchor. 29 down, 18 to go, dosimeter at 57%. On the 4th entry, the gravity failed entirely in compartment E. The water went spherical again, but this time it was contaminated water, opaque with bismuth, and Marin lost visual reference within seconds. Her helmet lamp was aglow in murk. The guideline was her only anchor, and she followed it by touch, hand over hand, until she found the next Dreshani, a juvenile, small enough to tuck against her chest, trembling with a full-body vibration that was either terror or hypothermia or both. She cradled the juvenile and kicked for the line, found the line, followed it, felt the bulkhead frame against her outstretched hand, and pulled through into the threshold, where Wen's hands were waiting to take the subject. 3 minutes 50, Wen said. "I know." Back in, the 5th entry, a pair of adults, one of them barely conscious, the other supporting its companion with pectoral fins locked around the limp body. Marin harnessed the conscious one first, then the unconscious one, and towed them both. The current from the failed gravity plating pushed her sideways, and she slammed into a channel junction hard enough to crack the dosimeter housing on her wrist. The number still read, 63%. On the other side of compartment E, Vasquez and Reese were working their 9 subjects. Marin could hear them on the calm, short, professional calls. "Object secured. Beginning pull. Clear." Vasquez's voice had lost its training drill brightness. It was flat now, focused, emptied of everything except the mechanics of the job. Marin recognized that voice. It was the voice she had found in herself at 22, on her 3rd real extraction, when a V-Thrani freighter had been venting atmosphere and the only way in was through a hull breach barely wider than her shoulders. The voice that said, "The fear is real and the work is also real and the work wins." Vasquez pulled all 9, 0 casualties. His dosimeter hit 74% on the last entry. 38 down, 9 remaining, all in compartment F, the deepest, the hottest. Marin checked Vasquez's dosimeter, then Wen's, then Reese's. Vasquez, 74. Wen, 68, Reese, 61. "Vasquez, you're done. Out. Wen, you're close. 1 more anchor stint and then you're done too." "Chief, your own." "I know what my own reads." Wen, 67%. "Reese, you're my anchor for compartment F. Wen, take the last anchor on this threshold. If I'm not back in 4 minutes, you pull. If Reese calls an emergency pull, you pull. If the bulkhead starts cycling to sealed, you pull and then you leave. Clear." "Clear." "If I come out of compartment F and hand you a subject, you hand them to Tanaka in the corridor and Tanaka gets them to the transfer cradles. Chain of hands. Nobody waits. Nobody holds. The subjects move upstream like a river running backward." "Clear, Chief." Compartment F was the worst. The radiation read 260 at the threshold, 60 millisieverts above her suit rating. The water was nearly black with contamination, and Marin's helmet lamp was a pale smear in the murk. Gravity was at perhaps 0.2, enough to give a faint sense of down, not enough to keep the water from climbing the walls in slow, undulating sheets. She went in. The Dreshani were clustered again. 9 of them in the tightest formation she had seen, bodies pressed together, gill crests meshed, tails interlocked. The communal stress response at maximum. The harmonic vibration was so intense that Marin felt it in her teeth. She could not see all of them. The contaminated water reduced visibility to less than 2 meters, and the cluster was large enough that the far side was a shape in murk, a suggestion of movement, a pulse of bioluminescence from stressed Dreshani skin that flickered like cold lightning beneath the surface. 9 subjects clustered compartment F, she reported. I'm going to work the perimeter, one at a time, starting with the outermost. She reached for the nearest Dreshani and the cluster contracted. Every body pulled inward. The harmonic vibration spiked. Marin stopped, hung in the contaminated water. Her dosimeter ticked from 67 to 68 as she watched. She remembered something from the species briefing that she had flagged during her first week aboard. A detail that hadn't seemed relevant during pool drills. The Dreshani communal stress response was not just physical proximity, it was a shared regulatory mechanism. The interlinked gill crests allowed the cluster to share oxygenation across individual bodies. Members of the cluster with stronger gill function effectively breathed for those with weaker function. Separating them too quickly could cause the weaker members to desaturate and lose consciousness. She needed to calm the cluster before she could break it. Marin pulled her helmet off. The water hit her face, and it was warm and tasted of metal and salt. She blinked against it, held her breath for a moment, then breathed through the suit's backup respirator, a small mouthpiece that provided filtered air but left her face exposed. Without the helmet, the dosimeter readout was gone. She couldn't see her exposure number anymore. What she could see was clearer. The helmet's visor had been fogging at the edges from the temperature differential, and without it the Dreshani cluster resolved into individual bodies. 9 faces. 9 sets of enormous dark eyes watching her. She extended her hand, open palm, fingers relaxed, the same gesture she had used in compartment C. The silver-blue female was not here. These were different Dreshani, darker-skinned, with gill crests that ranged from deep violet to near black. But the response to the gesture was the same. After a long moment, one of the outermost Dreshani uncurled a pectoral fin and touched Marin's fingertips. The vibration shifted. Marin harnessed the first one, towed her to the threshold, handed her to Reese, went back in. The second, the third. Each extraction required re-establishing the calm. Each time Marin returned to the shrinking cluster, she extended her hand and waited for the touch before she moved. Her breath fogged in the contaminated water. The metallic taste coated her tongue. Something in the back of her mind was doing math. Time in the hot zone, accumulated dose, the exposure curve for unshielded facial tissue and irradiated water, and she told that part of her mind to shut up. The math would be there when she got out. The Dreshani were here now. 4th, 5th, 6th. On the 7th extraction, the Dreshani she reached for a juvenile, barely conscious, skin nearly opaque with stress coloration, didn't respond to the hand gesture, didn't respond to touch. Marin checked the gill crests and found them barely moving. The tissue was swollen shut with bismuth irritation. The juvenile was suffocating in water. Marin pinched the gill crests open with her fingers, holding the tissue apart to allow flow. The Dreshani's body convulsed once, then the gills fluttered, and a stream of contaminated water pushed through the tissue. The juvenile's eyes opened, focused on Marin's face, her actual face, unhelmeted, wet, human, close, and made a sound that was less than a whisper. "I know," Marin said, "I know. Come on, we're going." She towed the juvenile out with one hand holding the harness line and the other keeping the gill crests propped open. It took 5 minutes and 12 seconds. 18 seconds past the 4-minute limit. Reese had not pulled the line because Reese could hear her breathing on the comm and had made the judgment call that a breathing swimmer past time was better than an interrupted extraction of a juvenile in respiratory failure. Marin did not reprimand her. She handed the juvenile to Reese and went back in. 8th, a large male, disoriented, his tail thrashing weakly against a channel wall. Marin steadied him, harnessed him, pulled. The current from the dying gravity plates pushed them both into a wall junction, and Marin felt something in her left shoulder, the shoulder with the metal pin, shift in a way that sent white light across her vision. She kept swimming. The shoulder could be wrong later. Not now. 46 down, 1 remaining. The last Dreshani in compartment F was at the very back of the main channel, in a section where the bismuth concentration was highest, and the water was so opaque that Marin could not see her own hands in front of her. She navigated by touch, following the channel wall with her fingertips, the guideline trailing behind her in the murk. She found the last subject by sound. The Dreshani was singing. Not the harmonic vibration of the cluster, not the clicking of distress, not the low pulse of communication. Singing. A single sustained note, rising and falling in a pattern that had the cadence of something ancient, something that predated language. It echoed in the flooded channel, reverberating off the iridescent walls, and for a moment Marin stopped swimming and just listened. The note was beautiful. It was also the sound of someone who had decided they were going to die here and had chosen to die with their voice in the water. Marin followed the sound. The Dreshani was wedged into an alcove where 2 channels met. An older female, her skin deeply lined with age patterns, her gill crests elaborate and laced with the silver white of advanced years. She was not struggling. She was still. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and the singing continued without interruption as Marin approached. Marin touched her hand, open palm, fingers relaxed. The singing stopped. The Dreshani's eyes focused. They found Marin's face close, unhelmeted, human, impossibly present in the hot, dark water at the bottom of a dying station. And something happened in those enormous liquid eyes that Marin had seen exactly once before, on a Cetacean deep space station 3 years ago, when a being who had accepted death looked at a being who had come to refuse it on their behalf. "One more," Marin said. "You're my last one, let's go." The Dreshani allowed herself to be harnessed. She did not resist. She did not assist. She simply watched Marin's hands as they worked, and when the harness was secure, she made a single sound. One syllable, low and resonant, in a language the broken translator didn't attempt to render. Marin pulled her out. The corridor was a blur of amber murk and guideline, and the ache in her left shoulder that had graduated from sharp to deep to the kind of pain that felt structural. She kicked, and pulled, and kicked, and the bulkhead frame appeared in the murk and Reese's hands were there, and the old Dreshani was lifted into the threshold, and the air hit Marin's face and she gasped. 47, Reese said. 47 total, all breathing. Marin braced her hands on the bulkhead frame and breathed. The air tasted sweet after the metallic water. Her left arm was not working correctly. Her face was red and hot in a way that she recognized as mild radiation burn from the unshielded exposure. The dosimeter on her suit, the one on her wrist, not the helmet she'd taken off 3 compartments ago, read 89%. "Chief," Wen's voice from the corridor, thin with the particular emotion that young swimmers try to keep out of their comms. "All 47 are in the transfer chain. Tanaka confirms 47 in the cradles. Priya confirms 47 through decon. The Harrogate's medical team has them. Status on the juniors. All above threshold, all pulled off the line. Vasquez is in medical getting his dosimetry workup. Nobody's hurt." "Good," Marin pushed herself upright. Her shoulder made a sound she didn't like. "Let's go home." She walked the corridor back to the docking collar in gravity that was failing in slow, irregular waves. Twice she lifted off the floor and drifted, and twice she caught a handhold and pulled herself back down. The Dreshani habitat around her was silent now. The singing had stopped. The harmonic vibrations had stopped. The clicking had stopped. All of it was aboard the Harrogate, in clean water, under lights that were not amber. At the docking collar, the Harrogate's executive officer was waiting. Commander Diallo looked at her face, the radiation flush, the swelling around her eyes, the raw redness where the contaminated water had sat against her skin for the better part of 2 hours. "You took your helmet off," he said. Visor was fogging. "That's not why you took it off." Marin looked at him. She did not answer. They both knew why she had taken it off. She had taken it off because the Dreshani needed to see a face, not a helmet, not a visor, a face, a person, someone who had come into their water, into the poison and the dark and the failing gravity, and stayed there with them, barefaced, exposed, present. That was the job. You went in when everyone else was coming out. And when the people you were going in for needed to see a face, you showed them a face. Diallo didn't press it. He handed her a thermal blanket and pointed her toward medical. The Harrogate's surgical bay was full. 47 Dreshani civilians in oxygenated transfer cradles, arranged in rows along the bay floor, each cradle connected to the ship's water recycling system to maintain the precise temperature band the Dreshani required. The ship's medical team, 6 doctors, 4 nurses, 2 xenobiologists, moved between the cradles with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this, and were quietly astonished that the training had proved sufficient. Marin walked through the bay on her way to her own dosimetry workup. She walked slowly, because her shoulder would not allow speed and because she wanted to see. The first Dreshani from compartment A, the one who had touched her fingers through the water and made the untranslated harmonic sound, was in the 3rd cradle. Her gill crests had regained full color. Her eyes were clear. When Marin passed, the Dreshani lifted one pectoral fin from the water in a gesture that was unmistakable in any species. The juvenile from compartment F, the one whose gill crests Marin had held open with her bare fingers, was in the 17th cradle, connected to a supplemental oxygenation line. The medical team had already begun treating the bismuth irritation in the gill tissue. The juvenile was conscious, and her eyes followed Marin across the bay. The old female from the back of compartment F, the one who had been singing, was in the last cradle. She was still. Her eyes were closed, but her gill crests were moving in the slow, even rhythm of natural sleep. Not distress, not shutdown, sleep. The dosimetry workup took 20 minutes. The results were what Marin expected: elevated whole-body exposure, localized facial dose from the unshielded period in compartments E and F, and the recommendation for a 48-hour monitoring period followed by a review of her quarterly dosimetry cap. The doctor, a woman named Chen who had served with Marin on 2 previous postings, looked at the numbers, looked at Marin, and said nothing for a long moment. "Your left shoulder is dislocated," Chen said finally. "I'm aware. The facial erythema will resolve in 72 hours. The shoulder needs reduction and immobilization." After what? Marin looked through the surgical bay's observation window. The Dreshani ring was visible outside, its silver torus catching the light of the system's primary star, Section 7 still marked by the faint shimmer of emergency containment fields over the hull breaches. A repair convoy from Earth's Corps of Engineers was already visible at the edge of the viewport, 4 ships in formation, running lights bright against the clean blue of the planet's atmosphere. The Dreshani had not asked for them. The Harrogate had filed the damage report and the convoy had simply appeared, the way Earth's convoys tended to, carrying hull plating, environmental engineers, water purification modules. And if the manifest Marin had glanced at on the way through the corridor was accurate, a prefabricated aquatic habitat module that could house the displaced residents of Section 7 until the repair was complete. Nobody had asked for the habitat module. The Dreshani had not requested it. The Harrogate had not requisitioned it. It had simply been included in the convoy's loadout because someone in the logistics chain had looked at the damage report, calculated the displacement numbers, and decided that bringing a temporary home was more efficient than explaining why they hadn't. That was the part that the galaxy never quite understood about humans, not the warships, not the extraction teams, not the swimmers who went into irradiated water without helmets. It was the logistics officer at a desk 6 systems away who read a damage report and added a habitat module to the manifest because of course you would. Because what else would you do? "After I check on the 47th, Marin said. She walked to the last cradle. The old Dreshani female opened her eyes as Marin approached. The singing Dreshani, the one who had been waiting to die at the bottom of the hot zone, in the dark, in the poison, with her voice in the water. Marin sat down on the deck beside the cradle. Her left arm hung at her side, useless. Her face was hot and swollen. She smelled like irradiated bismuth and Dreshani salt water and her own sweat. 47, she said to the old Dreshani. All of you, all breathing. The Dreshani looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out with one pectoral fin slowly, deliberately, and touched Marin's hand. The touch lingered. The fin was smooth and cool and impossibly gentle. And the old Dreshani spoke a single word. Low, resonant, felt more than heard. The station's translator was offline, and the Harrogate systems did not attempt to render it. Marin did not ask what it meant. She did not need to. Some words carried their meaning in the way they were spoken, in the tremor of the voice, in the pressure of the touch, in the eyes of someone who had stopped singing, because a stranger had swum through poison to find her. She sat with the old Dreshani until Chen came to reduce the shoulder. She did not leave. She did not move to the next task or the next patient or the debrief. The job was to go in when everyone else was coming out. But sometimes the job was also to stay. The Harrogate's after-action report, filed by Commander Diallo 41 hours later, listed the extraction as a Category 3 mass casualty response. 47 subjects recovered from a contaminated aquatic environment with failing gravity, elevated radiation, and zero pre-existing rescue infrastructure in the affected species emergency protocols. 0 fatalities. 0 subjects lost in transit. 0 subjects lost in decontamination. All 47 transferred to the Dreshani Medical Authority at Ring Section 2 within 72 hours. The report listed Chief Petty Officer Marin Salk's personal dosimetry at 89% of quarterly maximum achieved in a single operation, a new record for the Interstellar Extraction Corps that nobody in the Corps considered a record worth celebrating. Her left shoulder was reduced and immobilized. The facial erythema resolved within the predicted window. The metal pin in the shoulder, the one from the Kethara platform 2 years earlier, had shifted position during the extraction and would require surgical correction at the next port of call. The 6 junior swimmers were commended. Vasquez was flagged for accelerated qualification review. Wen was promoted to swimmer second class, effective immediately. The Dreshani government filed a formal acknowledgement with Earth's diplomatic corps 14 days after the event. It was brief, procedural, and contained a single untranslated Dreshani word at the bottom of the document, the same word the old female had spoken in the surgical bay. The diplomatic corps linguists spent 3 weeks attempting to translate it. The closest approximation they produced was a compound concept that did not map cleanly to any single human word. The first component meant one who enters the water for another. The second component meant and does not count the cost. Diallo read the translation at the next crew briefing. Marin was not present. She was in the pool, running zero-gravity water entry drills with a new group of junior swimmers. "What if 4 minutes isn't enough?" one of them asked. "Then you come back," she said, "and you go in again."